Hi guys, this video is going to take you through how to purge your Schlenk flask. It's obviously a very important process in order to put our system under a vacuum and then from there an inert atmosphere to undertake our air sensitive chemistry from. So we always add in our solid reagents before we purge our Schlenk flask. And we need to remember as well to add a stirrer bar in. So we slide that down the side of the Schlenk rather than dropping it, as we may damage the glassware. And as outlined in previous videos as well, we need to make sure that any material that we've added into our Schlenk flask has been removed from the neck with a tissue or blue roll. So attaching our tubing, we need to make sure that it's forced over the olive, the little bump in the arm, and also we support the arm as we add in our tubing, as it can be quite fragile with pressure applied to it. It may seem obvious, but we also need to be aware of which tap is connecting our tubing to our Schlenk flask, as often these can get tangled up. We can make a mistake by turning the wrong tap instead of the one which is actually connected to our system. So with two decent lines of grease, we can attach our stopper to our Schlenk flask that is cleaned of any material, rotating it around in order to form a good seal with translucent grease. Notice as well at this point that the tap arm is closed. As we begin to enter our purge cycle, we always begin with the tubing and then expose our Schlenk flask with that tap, as we have much more control over this tap than we do with the taps connected to the vacuum line. So selecting the right tap on the line, we can now expose our tubing to vacuum, and you'll see here with the pressure gauge just in the corner, it will go back up to atmospheric pressure as air is being sucked out of our tubing there. And we don't need to wait until this is fully evacuated, we're just taking the shock out of the system here. So as soon as we see our arrow going down, we can then connect our Schlenk flask up to the vacuum as well. And you'll see when the connection has been made and it is only just opened as the arrow starts to go back up to higher pressures, and then we can slowly expose the Schlenk flask totally by opening up the tap fully. We then wait for the arrow to get back down to pressure, usually around 10 to the minus 1 mbar. As long as it's around that point, then we're working at sufficient pressures. So at that point then, we can then close this tap shut again and then backfill with nitrogen. So we can do this fairly quickly with the tubing, as the volume inside the tubing is small, and so we can keep an eye on the silicone oil bubbler here. When we're pushing gas back into an evacuated system, it tends to suck the oil back into the line, which we want to avoid. And so we do this very slowly and carefully, and you can see the bubbling happening on the oil bubbler. When we open it up and expose our evacuated Schlenk flask to nitrogen, the bubbling begins to stop and the oil begins to get sucked up. So we're going to balance it in between open and closed, making sure that we don't drain the oil bubbler of oil. Instead, we're just incrementally adding bits of nitrogen into our flask. And you can see here, if we do it too quickly, it will start to pull the oil out of our oil bubbler and into the trap here. We need to avoid this. If we were to totally drain our oil bubbler of oil, then we can't tell how much pressure is in the nitrogen manifold. So incrementally, we're just opening and closing the tap, bouncing it in between open and closed, until at some point we will equalize the pressure of nitrogen in our flask and in the nitrogen manifold, and then the system is totally under nitrogen. In order to speed this process up then, you may want to increase the pressure of nitrogen flowing through our system by just turning the nitrogen tap on the left of the fume hood up a little bit, and then it's a bit easier to backfill with nitrogen. So we'll see that here with an increased rate of bubbling. We can then just open it slightly, and when we see the bubbling either stop or the oil start to go up that spout there, we're going to just close it off again. And we do that until, as you can see now, the tap is fully open and the nitrogen is bubbling away as normal in the oil bubbler. We don't have to wait around for any pressure differences now. It's been backfilled with nitrogen, it's under an inert atmosphere. We then are going to close that tap off again and then repeat the whole process of evacuating and backfilling another 2 times, so 3 times in total. This ensures that we are removing any air from our system and replacing it with the inert gas nitrogen so that we can work in an air-sensitive atmosphere. Once we have done the 3 purges, then we keep our system under a flow of nitrogen, a positive pressure of nitrogen, to make sure that any air that tries to get in will be forced out. And so we can also turn the nitrogen down a little bit now, as we turned it up previously. It doesn't have to be that vigorous bubbling in the bubbler. So we just have it under a moderate flow of nitrogen, and from there we can undertake our manipulations.